On my recent 31-night South America cruise, I decided to do something different. I filmed live, in-the-moment updates, capturing exactly what I was seeing, discovering, and importantly, what surprised me, and the good and the bad, the best and the worst, that I felt travelers like you need to know about. Welcome aboard. I'm Gary Bembridge, and join me in 8 of the most visited cruise ports. And I'm going to start with the most ambitious and honestly riskiest thing I did on this entire trip. Because in Lima, Peru, I didn't just step off the ship for a few hours, I left it for 2.5 days, all to reach one of the 7 wonders of the modern world, Machu Picchu. And as I set off the first morning, there was one big question in my mind. Was this going to be incredible or a very expensive mistake? So we got into Lima very early. We had a 6 a.m. meetup and we then headed off. We had an hour-and-a-half flight to Cusco. Now, Cusco is the first stage to get into Machu Picchu. It is high up in the mountains. It's 11,000 feet high. So there's lots of discussion around how to cope with avoiding getting altitude sickness. We had some lunch, then we had a city tour. We also headed up to have a look at a sort of farm, I guess you'd call it, which had llamas, alpacas. We then went to our hotel. Now, we were staying at the Belmont Montessario Hotel. This is a 5-star hotel. It's an old monastery. It's actually a national monument. I had a really cozy room. We had a dinner that evening, but then really importantly was the next day. So again, it was a very early start. We set off at 6:30 a.m. to go to the train. Now, we were going on the Brüggen train, but we had to head through a very beautiful sacred valley to Ollantaytambo station, and we boarded the magnificent Brüggen train. It was very exciting. Now, this is old kind of Pullman style coaches which have been revamped, and it's run by the Belmont Group. So of course the Belmont Group also run famous trains such as the Orient Express. They run Belmont trains in the UK. There's 2 dining cars, 1 bar/observation, and there's actually 3 toilets if you're interested. So lunch was served. It was a fabulous 3-course meal. About 2.5 hours later, we pulled into the station at Aguas Calientes. So we got off the train and we then headed to the buses. Now, Machu Picchu is 1,000 feet above Aguas Calientes, and you wind up there in these buses on this really narrow road. And we eventually got to the top of the hill, to the entrance to Machu Picchu. We were given our tickets and we headed in. Now, what's important to know is they sell 5,000 tickets a day, and there are 3 different routes. Now, we have route number 2 as part of this overall package with the Brüggen. Very quickly, we headed around the corner and we got that classic view of the Machu Picchu citadel. I have to say, it was absolutely breathtaking, but it was so thrilling and exciting seeing it. It wasn't massively busy, because you were there in the afternoon. So it was great because it wasn't big crowds pushing and shoving. Now, I mentioned earlier that Brüggen was the man that brought Machu Picchu to fame. Of course, it was never lost. The locals kind of knew it was there. And some explorers had been there a little bit before. Apparently, he was actually looking for El Dorado, this famed supposed Inca city of gold. Some locals took him up there and he realized this was a significant place. It was apparently built in the mid-1400s by the Incas. No one's really sure what it was built for. The assumption was it was some kind of royal compound. There was between 800 and 1,000 people living there. It was abandoned in the mid-1500s, and it's believed it was probably abandoned because the Spanish were pushing their way through Peru, and there was a sense that maybe the Incas were fleeing the Spanish who were advancing. You can spend 2.5 to 3 hours there on your ticket. Once we left, we then went to actually another Belmont hotel, which is right at the entrance, where included in the whole package was a drink, some snacks. We then got on that bus to weave our way back down that rather steep hill. We then headed back to the Aguas Calientes station, boarded the train. Again, we were offered an incredible meal, a 3-course meal. They had the bar open, of course. You had the band still playing. We eventually got back to the Ollantaytambo station. It was around about 8:30. Go back to the hotel around about 10 o'clock at night. So a very long day, but it was absolutely magnificent. The train was fabulous. Machu Picchu was phenomenal. I will make dedicated videos about these experiences, diving into much more detail. The next morning, we got up relatively early. We flew back and reboarded the ship. So it was 2.5 days, 2 nights, and a huge amount of money. But as Well as being an extraordinary off-ship experience, it also reinforced something important about this region, the diversity of sights and experiences. For example, I got to visit one of the most remote, isolated places in the world, a windswept, remote British territory with just a few thousand people, no trees, and more penguins than humans, the Falkland Islands. I am in Port Stanley, which is the capital of the Falkland Islands, or as the Argentinians know it, the Malvinas, a disputed territory. Now, the Falkland Islands is actually 700 of them. There's only two real main ones, the east and the west. And Stanley is the capital. There's about 3,000 people live in the Falkland Islands, 2,000 of them live in Stanley. This used to be a really important part of the world until the opening of the Panama Canal in 1914. Ships that would pass through and by Cape Horn would call into the Falklands for repairs, supply, etc. So when the Panama Canal opened in 1914 and ships started coming down here, kind of the whole economy collapsed. And that's when they had to find new things to do. So for example, they found things like sheep farming and so on. The British had a permanent settlement here from the early 1800s. Now, what's interesting about the Falkland Islands is there is no indigenous population because basically there's nothing here. It's very windswept, it's very remote. In fact, there's not even trees because it's too windy for trees to even grow. In 1982, the Argentinians decided to go to war. They invaded the Falklands to stake their claim on the Malvinas. And there was a 10-week war. Margaret Thatcher sent a lot of troops down here, and eventually the Argentinians then surrendered in June. In 2013, a referendum was held, and almost 100% of people said they want to stay British. It is actually a British territory. They have their own government. They have a governor, though. The British government really looks after foreign policy, defense, that kind of stuff. Because it's so remote and it is very windy and stormy, it can be a little bit hit and miss in terms of getting in if you're coming here on a cruise ship, because currently the ships have to tender people in. So if there's a lot of wind and so on, it can be quite challenging to get in. I've been fortunate enough, this is my third time here, and we've always managed to get in. Now, while there are around about 3,000 people on all of the Falklands, there are around 1 million penguins. So when you come to the Falklands, one of the key excursions to do is, of course, something which gets you to see penguins. I've actually come to a place called Bluff Cove. This tour costs around about $230. The tours are quite expensive here. It's about a half an hour drive or so from Stanley, and it's a privately owned, massive big estate. They do some sheep farming. Tourism is a big part of what they do, although I believe they may be retiring from that. It is a penguin rookery. There's colonies here. It has king penguins. It has gentry penguins, and apparently it also has Magellan penguins, although there doesn't seem to be any here at the moment. Lots of chicks that we saw here. Now, it's a big sprawling place. There's a big lagoon. There's a beach over there. You can get pretty close to penguins. As you probably know, penguins are quite calm when it comes to humans, because humans aren't seen as a predator. And you get quite a lot of time to spend here. So this is Bluff Cove. If it is still available as an option, if you ever come here, definitely go to. There are some other excursions, like to Volunteer Point is one of the most popular ones. Also included in the 2 hours that you spend here is a stop in this place here, which is the Sea Cabbage Cafe. It's a really nice little complex. So you get 2 sweet treats. I had a scone and a little bit brownie, tea, hot chocolate. You also then have a little museum and a shop's right by the beach. So you get an incredible view across of the beach over there as well. Standing there surrounded by penguins massively outnumbering people on a remote windswept island, it really hit me. South America cruising keeps serving up surprises, because the next stop after the Falklands was a city that claims to be at the very end of the world, Ushuaia. Ushuaia in Argentina is the southernmost city on the planet, a place that was once so inhospitable it was used as a penal colony, but is now the gateway to Antarctica. Now, there's lots of things you can do in Ushuaia. You can go and explore the Beagle Channel, you can go into the national park, but my favorite thing to do is to go on the train to the end of the world. It is very historic, has a great story behind it. So let's go and find a little bit more about train to the end of the world. This is a old convict train line. So I used to take the convicts into the Terra del Fuego National Park to chop wood, bring wood back to basically build Ushuaia. So you line up, you pose for pictures with people dressed as convicts, which of course they then get you to buy $17. It's a great train. You're packed into these little carriages and you weave your way through the rather beautiful Terra del Fuego National Park. And now I'm at the Macarena station, and you spend about 15-20 minutes here. So one of the reasons for stopping at the Macarena, as well as to sell you the pictures, is you get to have a great look at close-up of the actual train. As you can see, these little carriages here are very narrow. It's a very narrow gauge train line. Time to head on the train to the next stop. So it's definitely one of the great excursions to do. It costs about $239 to do the excursion, but it is really good fun. You get to see lots of sights through the park. Now it's very interesting because Ushuaia originally was created as a penal colony, and it has now become, of course, the gateway to Antarctica. Something like 90 to 95% of all Antarctic trips leave from here. Now today we've only just got classic ships in, the Amsterdam and Europa 2. Ushuaia is in a part of the world that's known as Terra del Fuego, which means land of fire. Now, it's got nothing to do with volcanoes. It's literally when Westerners started sailing down here, like Magellan was the first person, he saw these fires on the coast, and so he named it Terra del Fuego, land of fire. Now, what's really interesting is Westerners eventually started to come down here. They were quite shocked because the indigenous people were naked. They didn't wear clothes. Now, it's cold, it's miserable, and they were completely naked. And that's why they had so many fires, to keep warm. Don't know why they didn't have clothes. They would even have fires apparently on the canoes. So there was nothing here, and eventually they decided to create a penal colony because it was so inhospitable, so awful. So it opened in 1902, and it ran for 45 years until 1947, when General Perón closed it down. The city kind of didn't have any purpose for being for a very long time, so eventually it was reinvented with no taxes, encouraging people to set up businesses here. And then, of course, with the growth of Antarctica and Antarctic exploration, that is when it really started to take off. When you dock here, there's a very long pier. It's normally got lots of expedition ships in here. But what's great is once you come out, across the road is a visitor center which has free Wi-Fi, which people like. You have to go a block up a hill into town, and town is crammed full of different restaurants, bars, lots and lots of chocolate shops, lots of souvenir shops. And also a hard rock cafe, basically one long street where you've got everything. It's very handy to just sort of pop out and self-explore. But of course, the most magical thing I think to do is the train to the end of the world. Though to my surprise, some of the most magical and memorable experiences in South America don't come in the ports themselves. They were while at sea, Scenic cruising around Ushuaia, and from there to Punta Arenas via the Chilean fjords. But why? Because during those days, there were 4 remarkable sights, each more spectacular than the one before. Now, the challenging thing with talking about these 4 different ones is deciding which is the most spectacular. So you decide yourself based on what you're going to see. The first of those is, of course, Cape Horn, which is right at the base of South America. It's where ships used to have to pass before the Panama Canal was opened. It's a very treacherous part of the world, very rough seas, very strong winds, lots of wrecks down here. I've been down Cape Horn a couple of times. On this particular trip, it was incredibly windy the day we went. The ship was actually listing at a big angle. The captain kept having to stress, don't panic, it's all perfectly fine and normal. We actually passed around Cape Horn about 6:30 p.m. in the evening. Everyone was out because it was very atmospheric. As you passed from the Atlantic into the Pacific, he blew the horn to signify that we'd passed. Between Ushuaia and Punta Arenas, you sail through what's known as Glacier Alley. There are 5 phenomenal glaciers. Of course, glaciers being all fresh water, they're all coming from the same big ice field in this case, which is known as the Cordillera Darwin ice field. The 5 glaciers that you spot are all named after countries that did significant exploration down there. The Italia, the España, the Almeida, which is linked to Germany, the Hollanda, and the Francia. Each of them are actually more spectacular than the next. What's great about doing it on the Holland America ship I was on is they opened the bow of the ship and they had commentary from the travel guide the whole time. So what is the third of these must-see sea day sites? This was on another day of scenic sailing. This time we were sailing through the Serena Channel. We passed two rather unusual places. The first of these was passing an iconic wreck of a ship called the SS Santa Leonora. It was wrecked in March 1968. Originally it was the USS Riverside, a Second World War battleship. It then became a more commercial ship, and it's just a reminder of how treacherous it is here. The second thing we did is sail through Summer Pass. This is really quite eerie. It's the shallowest part of passing through the Chilean fjords. There's only 4 feet underneath the hull of the ship. So we had to slow right down and pass through two buoys, a red one and a green one, really slowly, easing our way through. The fourth site, which was unbelievably impressive, was a glacier, which is unique in several ways. It's known as the Brüggen Glacier, although it's also known more affectionately as the Po the 11th Glacier, after a pope. It's the longest glacier in the southern hemisphere outside Antarctica. It is 66 kilometers or 41 miles in length. But what makes this glacier even more interesting is it's one of the few glaciers in the world that is actually growing in size. It is not retreating. It's in Chile's Bernardo O'Higgins National Park. We got up really, really close, which is quite remarkable, and we saw some carving happen as well. We'd approached it initially about 7:30 a.m. in the morning. At that time it was very misty, it was very difficult to see. Luckily things lifted and we got up so close. It was just a remarkable sight. As I mentioned, you can see scenic sailing is as important as the ports in South America. But after those few days of that mix of scale and spectacle at sea, I arrived somewhere that brought me back to wildlife, but in a completely different way than before. Because just off the coast of Punta Arenas in Chile is an island packed with penguins, not a handful, not a few hundred, thousands. But most of the time, the seas around the area make it impossible to get to see them. So I'm on an island called Magdalena Island. This is a place that I had really wanted to come to when I was last in Punta Arenas, but weather means that it's often challenging to get to this island. It's just off the coast of Punta Arenas. Now, I came on an excursion which is costs around $370, and it's on a fast speedboat, so it takes about 50 minutes to get here. There is another tour which is about $320, where you can come on the catamaran. It takes a bit longer. So what's interesting about Magdalena Island is it is pocketed with these little burrows with Magellan penguins. So all over the island are these little burrows, and just dotted everywhere you look are Magellan penguins. Now we're here in March, so it's toward the end of the season. So all the penguins, both the chicks that were born in December and also the adults, are molting. So they're all a bit motley looking, but they will be at the end of March heading off basically for winter, and they'll come back about October, November time to meet up again and make babies. Today we've got beautiful weather, sunny, as you can see, a little bit chilly. As you can probably see, there's this path that's being created weaving through all of these burrows, so it's quite handy. You're not allowed to step over or put your hand over here, and obviously if a penguin wants to cross, you need to stop, stand back and let them cross. So it's very organized here. There's also up the top of the hill a very large lighthouse, which is now apparently automated. Now coming in, you probably can't see it, but coming in just over there is the catamaran, which is bringing, I guess, people from the cruise that are on the slower things. The nice thing about coming this early one is we are the only kind of group here. So you can probably see now behind me, there's a lot of people on that other excursion that came across on the catamaran. So if one can possibly push to the more expensive excursion, definitely makes a big difference. After we left Magdalena Island, we headed off to another island to have a look at sea lions and elephant seals, and it was incredible. On this island, the beach was just ram-packed full of just seals, sea lions. It was really quite remarkable. Now, Punta Arenas is a really interesting city. It was originally a bit like Ushuaia, created as a penal colony. but it became one of the richest per capita cities in the world, sort of in the late 1800s, and they built these big, magnificent villas and plazas, and it really was very rich until the Panama Canal opened, which a bit like other places like Port Stanley, when the Panama Canal opened, all this traffic that was coming around South America, calling into places like Punta Arenas for repairs, supply, and so on, just evaporated. Now, it still had some affluence because of sheep farming, llama farming, etc. But the city kind of fell on sort of harder times after the Panama Canal. And one of the things I hadn't really realized until this trip is just the impact that the Panama Canal had all around this lower part of South America. And by this point in the journey, as well as appreciating this, it had become clear to me that a South American cruise offers incredibly diverse and unique things to see, including some that defy explanation, which brings me to one of the most unusual and hotly debated sites I went to see during my trip. Sites that I could only get to from a port created in a remote desert in Peru, and then only see them on a costly excursion from the air. The port I'm at is a created port. It's General San Martin, and it is in Peru, and it's basically in the desert. And it's one of the reasons for being here is it does a lot of cargo, but also it is close to one of the most significant man-made structures. It's around about 2,000 years old, so it's slightly beeping in the background from the cargo stuff there. But these are known as the Nazca, not as in US NASCAR, but the Nazca lines. They're in the Nazca desert, hence their name. These are very long. Some of them are 1,000 feet, that's 300 meters long, and they make no sense unless you're up in the air, which makes them kind of really rather strange. Their names include things like hummingbird, monkey, spider. They even have one called the astronaut. Excursion was a rather expensive one, but one I wanted to do. It cost $999. No one really knows why they were built. Some feel that they were sort of structures to the gods, to thank them or ask for water, because this is a desert and they wanted water. Of course, there was the alien theory, which is largely debunked, that they were created as alien signs, or they were perhaps some sort of complicated irrigation system. But they are really quite remarkable. Now, the reason they survive so long is the way they're created is by lifting effectively the top layer of the desert to reveal a lighter soil underneath. And because it's so dry, no rain, they basically lasted for so long. It's apparently around about 300 of them. They've been using AI and drones to find more of them. Was it worth spending $999 for? Probably not. But it's a UNESCO World Site. It was very unique, and it was definitely great to see. But would I recommend to do it? Definitely, if you get motion sickness and don't like planes doing this, then don't. I could see that a couple of people were starting to feel rather motion sick. And this experience did raise a question about cruising South America. Just because you can do something, should you? Because not every port and not every excursion lives up to expectations. And nowhere made that clearer to me than Puerto Montt in Chile. Because on paper, this should have been one of the most scenic stops of the trip. Lakes, volcanoes, waterfalls. But travel doesn't always go to plan. Join me on a rain-soaked and slightly noisy boat to explain. So I think it's fair to say that the first part of the excursion was not particularly good. So we're on Lake Todos Los Santos, which is a very beautiful lake, absolutely stunning. When it's in 2023, it was just magnificent. And you have incredible views across of the volcano. Of course, today it's rather cloudy, rather overcast, and actually a bit rainy. So what I'm probably going to do is just like cheat and show you what it looks like when it's not. So I'm only here about 2 weeks later than I was here last time, just showing how sort of changeable the weather can be. Next up on the excursion was slightly more successful in some ways and not in others. So we came to Petaway Falls, or Petaway Falls is how it seems more correct to pronounce it. Absolutely stunningly beautiful falls. They're more kind of like rapids than falls. You can probably hear them roaring in the background. Beautiful sights. Two issues. One, you don't have enough time. We only have like 45 minutes here, and it's like you have to rush there, rush back. The other problem is that it's very popular. So many of the excursions come here. There's probably, I guess, good 500 or maybe more people arrive from Holland America on tours. That it is like, so it's completely jam-packed here. It's rammed full of people. So that also makes it a little bit challenging. So I'm always wondering if you actually came here, whether it's worth almost getting a taxi or an Uber here just before all the tours get here. So that's the thought. But this is definitely one of the highlights of coming here. Today's probably proved that travel isn't always Instagram perfect. Although you can see blue skies behind me now, it has actually been absolutely chucking with rain. It's actually still slightly raining now. So we are in a place called Puerto Varas, which means City of Roses. It's a very picturesque place, lots of German influences, which I will explain later. So it's about, I don't know, half an hour or so drive from those rather beautiful falls. We had lunch here. Now, what's quite good about the lunch setup is they send each of the buses to small individual restaurants. So it's just our bus having lunch. That was pretty good. We had some very nice soup. We had salmon. Now, the reason for salmon is this part of the world is sort of a salmon capital of sort of South America. It's very renowned for salmon. So we had salmon. I mentioned earlier the German influence, and a lot of the architecture is very Germanic. There's a German school here. A lot of the pastry shops and so on is very German influence. And that's because this whole area was originally settled largely by Germans. So it's quite a new part of the world. So Puerto Montt, which is where we had docked and actually tendered in. You have to tender in. There's no port there as such, no place to dock. We tendered in. It was only really created in the mid-1850s, and it was largely German immigrants that came and settled here. Originally very driven by agriculture, so there's a lot of timber, not exactly timber mining, a lot of timbering, lumberjacking with the natural forest. They still do quite a lot of timber, apparently. Puerto Montt is actually named after the president of Chile at the time. It's really weird because actually this Puerto Varas, when you look at it, you almost feel like you could be in like Austria or somewhere. Today, Puerto Montt is really known as being the gateway to the national parks, to the lakes, to see the volcanoes. As my time in Puerto Montt showed, one of the most important things to understand about this region is its unpredictability. And sometimes the experience you get is very different from the one you imagined. Which brings me to another stop in this vein, because this one left me conflicted. It was Coquimbo and La Serena in Chile, a place with long history and interesting roots and arguably much to see. But it was also a place that made me stop and think. Is every port on a South American cruise really a highlight? See what you think. So the ship docks in Coquimbo, and across the bay over there is La Serena. La Serena is the second oldest city after Santiago, which makes it quite an interesting place. There's this big, beautiful bay here. So La Serena was originally founded by the Spanish, as was Santiago. But what's interesting about Coquimbo is it was actually founded by the English. So English settlers moved across here, so both English and Scots. And the reason they moved across here was mining. So they headed across here. It's a very rich mining area, a lot of iron ore. Apparently there's still copper. So on the tour I went on, which cost about $110 US, we headed out on Coquimbo. We went to a scenic spot. And what I discovered in Coquimbo is still has a lot of roots to English. There's a statue of an Englishman, and there's very strong roots to the appreciation for the UK coming to develop this area. And you get a scenic view of two things, one of which is a large cross that was built in about 2000 and a large mosque. So what the mayor is doing is they're trying to start to build tourism. So they're trying to build these kind of icons. We then headed off to La Serena. And the first thing we went to was a fake Spanish lighthouse. Hopefully the sound of the ocean won't be too overpowering. So La Serena, which is where I am now, is a resort town. So there's massive long beaches with lots of beach clubs and so on, and a couple of kind of created attractions. So we're at a lighthouse, which was built in the 50s. It's sort of like a Spanish-inspired lighthouse. Beautiful views, great location. It is, of course, just for purely decorative purposes, I guess, as a little bit of attraction, a bit of an icon. We then headed into town for a walking tour. First stop, though, is at La Recova, which is a market. Been here since the mid 1700s. This one only opened in 1981. It's full of kind of tourist stuff largely. I don't think it's a particularly local market, like, or local people, if you like. Lots of bits and pieces, though, little souvenir stuff. After that, we headed on a rather rushed walking tour. It was a little bit frantic. We basically walked around, saw some kind of historic Spanish buildings, the Justice Department, the municipal buildings, a very important square, the main town square, which has this rather beautiful fountain called the Four Seasons Fountain. We then jumped on the bus, headed to a local restaurant where all the bus tours that were doing the same of us went, had empanadas, pisco if you wanted that, and they had a dance. Now, what was interesting with the traditional dance, which apparently originates more in Easter Island, is it reminded me so much of the dances that I saw in French Polynesia, and apparently that's the strong cultural connection. One noticeable thing was both the daily program and also our guide went to some pain to warn us about kind of petty crime, telling us to watch out for jewelry, our phones, things in our back pockets. So clearly kind of petty crime, pickpocketing, I guess like in many big cities, is an issue. But it's just interesting. This is the first stop I've had on this trip where they have really stressed the need to be aware and more cautious. Was coming to Coquimbo and La Serena wildly exciting? To be honest, it wasn't particularly. It was quite interesting, but not probably one of the highlights of this. It's definitely, I don't think, one of those highlight things. Now, actually, as you can see, it's rather beautiful weather that we've had here. I suspect actually there's some rather nice beaches. It might actually be more interesting as an excursion to do. But still, what really stood out to me was just how varied cruising South America is. Some stops are truly once in a lifetime. Some are fascinating, but require careful choices to get the best from them. But taken together, it is one of the most diverse and surprising cruise regions I've been to. So if you are considering cruising here, I have watch outs and specific tips on how to do it. Join me over in this video to find those out. See you over there.